All right, so today we are talking about Nexus, but more specifically, Mission Rock policies as they relate to Nexus payables. But it's a really long title, so it's Nexus Mission Rock policies. For any of you who don't know me, hi, I'm Sarah. Been with Mission Rock since the get-go. I was on site for the first, 3 years? 2 or 3 years. And now I'm your friendly Yardi and Nexus webinar host, and whatever other topics come across my path as well. So you'll be hearing my voice plenty. We're going over a good amount of information today. By this point, we are working under the assumption that you are already working in Nexus payables, are already familiar with it, and have completed the preceding course, that 3-hour one, where we go through the purchase orders and the invoices and how to link them. So if you have questions about any of those items, let me know. We might chat offline about those after the fact, just so you know. Today, I really want to drill down and get specific. We're going to do a very quick review of our roles and the workflow in Nexus. Then we're going to run through the vendor lifecycle, some great points on Yardi and Nexus integration. How much do they talk, and what do they say when they do talk? Our pay by fields. That's really the purpose of this course. We're going to go through each of the exceptions that we have. So petty cash, check request, expense request, and we're going to spend a good amount of time on CapEx expenditures, capital expenditures, and how those items are processed differently in Nexus than our standard items that are processed normally in Nexus, you know. At the end, we're going to touch on emergency checks, Hamilton Zane's invoices, and over budget authorization. So like I said, we're going to cover a lot of ground. As I mentioned, your resources for this course are uploaded in Grace Hill. They are uploaded in the webinar, and they're in Mission Control. So you've got a lot of things to help you after the fact as well. Speaking of, how was that transition? Your accountant is also a great resource for if you need help with Nexus. They are ultimately the final say-so in approving or rejecting invoices. So they are a fantastic resource for you as well. As I mentioned, you've got the Nexus Mission Rock Policy Manual for some specifics. There's also manuals within Nexus itself. While they are not Mission Rock specific, they can guide you through all the functionality, all the screenshots, all the good stuff. There's also the help desk in 2 spaces within that. You've got your admin support, so to get something corrected, to get a login, things like that. Your request type would be computer systems, Nexus, and pick your category from there. For Nexus training support, that comes to me, and I will gladly get you guys set up. While I will also answer my phone and email, I will answer you quickest through the help desk. Gets to me by going through training, picking Nexus, and anything from there comes to me, and I'll gladly, like I said, gladly get you guys set. All right, let's get going. So in our initial class, we talked about the on-site roles in Nexus. There's 4 of them, right? We've got the PO coder, which is your service managers. Their sole responsibility in Nexus is creating purchase orders. They can also correct rejected ones. That's what they're focused on. We've also got our PO invoice coder. Just a fun tidbit, Nexus calls this a PO coder. Wanted to share that because it's super fun to say. They also create purchase orders, but they also process invoices. Again, this is for our assistant managers on site. Property managers have one of 2 roles. They're either just an approver. All they can do is approve or reject purchase orders and invoices. Or if they do not have an assistant manager, generally if it's 250 units or less on their property, it combines all roles. So they will approve or reject purchase orders that came from their service manager. They'll process invoices. They'll make their own purchase orders, dabble in a little bit of everything, right? But what happens once it gets off-site? What are the corporate Nexus roles? Because there's a lot of different people involved in our invoices at this point. Anytime you see the title Approver 2 in Nexus, it is referring to your regional manager. Your regional manager will be approving our exceptions, right? Our petty cash, check request, expense request, CapEx. Also any items over $5,000. just to get their eyes on them. We also have approvers 3 and 4. That's our EVP and president, so Meredith, Kay, and Pat. They all have roles in Nexus. It's pretty rare that they'll be triggered for approval on items, but if you ever see it, now you know. Your regional service managers are also set up in Nexus, and they're involved with the CapEx projects. All they're doing is approving or rejecting invoices. We're going to get into that here in just a little bit. But along with your capital projects, you got one more role, RSM CapEx. They are an approving Mission Rock team member, and what they do is they take all approved capital expenditure invoices that the regional service manager is involved in. They will create the invoice for the regional service manager's involvement in it, and they will also work on like the draws or anything that happens behind the scenes there as well. We've got 2 roles in the accounting side of it too. We've got your post approver, is Nexus' fancy word for property accountant. Your property accountant will see every single invoice before it is paid, and they will approve them all. Once approved, it goes outside of Nexus actually into Yardi for the check to be cut. You've also got administrators. There's like six of us. I don't know. There's a handful of administrators for Nexus that are within Mission Rock. So they are able to do system errors, to create logins. They work on system updates. They troubleshoot, a little bit of everything. When you put in that help desk to the computer system section, goes to the team at Mission Rock. All right, now that we know all the players involved, I want to real quickly touch on our password policy. This is super important, you guys. I don't want to seem like a downer here, but I got to talk about it. We absolutely cannot share passwords for Nexus, period, end of story. Because there's so many roles, there's so many people involved in this, that's for a reason. Everybody should only have to work on their piece of the pie, right? And if we start sharing logins, we're messing with that approval procedures, we're messing with our transparency with everything. It will result in minimum, a write-up, and maximum termination. I'm telling you this because I don't want you to find out any other way. So that said, there's great ways that we do not have to share our passwords in Nexus. So I want to run through those together. If you need your login information, don't use someone else's. Put in a help desk ticket. Computer systems category, remember, that goes to our admins. They'll get you set up in a jiffy. Jiffy? Yeah. If someone's going on a vacation, you'll set up a delegation. Remember, the delegation is what takes your role, assigns it to your next level up. So assistant manager will go to property manager, PM to RM, and so forth. That way, when the person with the delegation receiving it logs in, they will see 2 roles and can work in both. That's not password sharing. That's the way to go. What if you've got an unexpected extended absence? I'm a great example of that. At my most recent property, it was like day 3 there, and we were doing a lender inspection. Long story short, it fell, hit my head, unconscious, you know, good stuff. I ended up being out for 2 weeks with like a really crazy concussion. That's an unexpected extended absence. Can Nexus sit around and wait for 2 weeks? No, we got to get our invoices paid. So what do? Put in a help desk ticket to the computer systems category. They can go on the back end and essentially force a delegation. That way we are not sharing passwords. And what if, unfortunately, a team member is no longer with Mission Rock? Your against system admin will deactivate their login information only after HR processes the termination paperwork. They will notify your admin of that, and they will make sure to get all the access set up. Okay. What about our workflow? What are the 9 steps for our invoices? Where do all of these different players of the field kind of come together? Remember, everything starts with a purchase order. Step 1. This right here, this is the key to making sure that Nexus works correctly on your property. These first 3 steps that we, before ordering, that we create a purchase order and submit it for approval. Then the purchase order is approved. Then we actually place the order for products or services. Those first 3 steps being in order is surprisingly important in making Nexus as a whole work for us. What happens after that? The purchase order sits there. And meanwhile, the vendor faithfully fulfills our order. They will either upload their invoice through Vendor Connect, or they will send it to Nexus via snail mail, because that's still a thing for some reason, or email, in which case Nexus will get the invoice, scan, and upload it. Now that we have the invoice in our system, we take the newly received invoice, the previously approved purchase order, we smash them together or link them together as a more professional word for that, copying over all approvals, all line items, all over budget information from the PO to the invoice, and thus saving us double work. Here's why we're having this class. We have exceptions to this, right? I mean, for every rule, there's got to be an exception, right? So we have got our pay-by fields. That's what we're going through in depth today. Petty cash, expense request, check request, and CapEx. All CapEx, all things ever CapEx. Why are they different? For those items only, we will not have a purchase order. All of those items require your regional manager approval, and in order for Nexus to route it correctly to them, we cannot have a purchase order attached to those invoices. Weird, right? But it totally works. So we'll show you how to do that. All right, regardless, once the invoice is done, it gets submitted for processing, at which point your property manager may need to approve it if it's outside that 10% threshold that we talked about. Might go through your regional manager for approval if it's one of those exceptions. It ends up with your accountant. They will approve it, and the accounts payable team will thus cut the check, pay the invoice, and make your vendors super duper happy. I mean, not just happy, super duper happy. So overall, a 9-step process. We've got a lot of different roles, a lot of people involved in Nexus in making sure that all of our invoices are correct, accurate, transparent. And that's how they all work together. What about those vendors? I've seen some questions over the past couple months of, hey, my vendor disappeared, or how do the vendors get in, or we got them set up like 2 weeks ago, and where are they? All right. All vendors still start their life with Mission Rock and Compliance Depot. It is our system for monitoring insurance requirements, making sure that they've got all the right liability and hoopla, all the good stuff. And they have to be approved in Compliance Depot before work is done on the community. But this is the next thing to remember. Once they're approved, we still need to assign them to our property in Compliance Depot. All of this still happens through that website. And once they're assigned to our property, that's what triggers the next 2 things. It triggers integration to Yardi. Compliance Depot feeds all that vendor information over to our property profile in Yardi. It takes about 24 to 48 hours. Then Yardi talks to Nexus, kind of playing hot potato with it. Takes 24 hours overnight for Yardi to feed Nexus that vendor information. Then we can select them in Nexus for our community for processing invoices, for creating purchase orders. What if you go to do that one day and they're gone? Well, there's a super great chance that their Compliance Depot approval expired, and we got to start the whole process over again. So if for some reason you either can't find them in Compliance Depot, I apologize, if you can't find them in Nexus, or you find them but can't select them, start at Compliance Depot. Make sure A, they're approved, and B, they're assigned to your property. And then just give it a couple days for it to pop up in Nexus. So speaking of our integration between Yardi and Nexus, here's what they talk about. And quite frankly, it's not much. They're kind of like that old married couple that's been together for so long, they really don't have to tell each other too much anymore, you know? But they get the important stuff across, right? So Yardi tells Nexus 3 things. Talks about invoice information for payment specifically. So it will give us like the date the check was cut, the amount of the check number. Does that every day. And actually throughout the day even. Overnight, it tells Nexus 2 things, our budget, actuals, the actual budget information, any accruals, things like that, and vendors. Both of those get fed to Nexus overnight. Nexus is a little obsessed. It talks about one thing and one thing only. That would be our invoices. But it sends a lot to Yardi. So it will send property, vendor information, the invoice date, the invoice number, the total, the line items, the descriptions, the posting period, a lot. Okay? Nexus tells Yardi this information every 15 minutes after it has been approved by accounting. Why am I mentioning this? Because what is on this screen is all that Nexus and Yardi talk about. So things that they do not talk about. The unit numbers that are selected when you're creating line items. It doesn't share that information. If you enter notes in Nexus for a PO or an invoice, that does not get into Yardi. Only your descriptions do. In Yardi, if you have reclasses, those don't always pop back up in Nexus. Your accountant's got to go back and do it manually. They never talk about purchase orders. They never talk about invoices until they're actually approved and executed. They also don't talk AME. So even though Nexus is scheduled to roll over into our next accounting month on our regular dates, it is not tied to Yardi. So if we're delayed in doing it in Yardi, Nexus keeps chugging along. And the last thing is Nexus did not receive information from Yardi, well, quite frankly, from before Nexus. So any invoices that we paid before August of last year actually do not appear in Nexus. So if you're like trying to research something from like way back when, which August of last year sounds like way back when to me, gotta look in Yardi. All right, let's talk about our pay by fields. So these are used to mark invoices that need regional manager approval before being routed to your accountant. There's 4 of them that we'll use. There's petty cash, expense reimbursement, check request, and capital expenditures, aka CapEx. There cannot be linked purchase orders for these types of invoices. And last but not least, how do we process it without the PO? We can add the line item directly onto the invoice. So let's take a look at each one of these. We're going to break down here. Petty cash. They're all going to start the same way. We've got our petty cash request form. That's on Mission Control. We are going to download that, fill it out, and send it with our supporting documentation to Nexus for them to upload as an invoice. Now, this is only true for petty cash, and for those adventurous souls out there, if you want, you can set up a petty cash vendor connect account for your property. And what it would do is just kind of take a couple days out of the mix, right? Because you send it to Nexus, takes them a day or two to upload it, then to get it back to you, right? Or you could do vendor connect, put it straight in there. We're not going to go into that part of it today, but if you want to try, directions are all outlined step by step in the Mission Rock Policy Manual. All right, once it's completed, uploaded, we see it as an image to convert to invoice. We click it and we process it by marking the pay by field as petty cash, and we process it without a purchase order by adding our line items straight onto the invoice. From there on, it's the same. We mark it ready for processing, but now it goes to our regional manager before the accountant for their approval. So let's go run through this in Nexus. Hey, Nexus. So we've got our images to convert to invoice, right? That's our inbox. And we've got our petty cash. So we're going to go ahead and convert this item. Does our same side-by-side deal that we love so much. It will show our actual petty cash request voucher, right? What we filled out from mission control. And then since we sent it all as one PDF, all of our supplementing documents thereafter. Man, that's a fancy way to say receipts. All right, on the right-hand side of the screen, let me make that just a little bigger. We're going to double check everything again. Remember, Nexus, a bunch of human beings work there. They can make mistakes. So let's make sure our petty cash vendor for our property is selected. It's pet and then our property number. Make sure the invoice number follows Mission Rock standards, that our dates are correct, the total is correct. And now we're going to see our pay by field. Woo, come back. There you go, pay by. We want to mark this as petty cash. So you'll notice now, can't submit it. I have nothing up at the top of the screen that says ready for processing. So I need to add my line items right on the invoice. And it looks remarkably like our line items that we do for purchase orders, right? We'll enter all of our line items exactly as they appear on the left-hand side of our screen. How cool is it that we've already got them listed, right? We don't have to go back and figure it out. We'll save it. And now we see the magic ready for processing button. I'm over budget because I'm in magical training land. There we go. Now you'll see that it says this invoice requires approval. We know now that it has triggered being petty cash and having no PO. It's triggered our RM approval. So we click submit for approval. That's all we got to do. Our RM approves it. It goes straight from there to our accountant, and we're set. How can you be sure? What if you're like me and you've just got this little distrust of technology, right? Scroll down to your history log. You'll see that it's like, hey, we forwarded this, blah, 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 based on the rule, blah, blah, blah. What you're looking for is submitted to, approver to. Remember, that's your RM. That's whose approval it is waiting on before going to your accountant. You guys, that's it. Easy breezy. So let's look at the next one. Let's look at our expense reimbursement. Guess what? Starts the same way. We download our expense reimbursement form. I believe it's actually called mileage and expense reimbursement. My apologies. It's found on Mission Control. We download it, we fill it out, we attach our supporting documentation and scan it as one PDF, email it to Nexus, and they upload it for us. Once uploaded, we're going to mark the pay by field as expense request and process it without a purchase order, which, when we submit it, allows it to go to our regional manager for approval. So even though there's the same steps, I just want to run through it one more time together. From our dashboard, we will see our images to convert to invoice. We will convert our expense request. We will see said expense request on the left-hand side. And on the right, we'll double check everything. Mark the pay by field as expense reports. We'll add our line item straight to the invoice, which again, we already did the work on the left-hand side, right? We already created our line items. We just need to enter them here. Once we save that line item and enter any over budget notes that we need, we'll be able to select ready for processing up at the top of our screen. That allows us to submit this for approval. And now it's waiting on our regional manager. I know that because my history log shows it's submitted to approver to. It doesn't show it's approved yet. Quick tidbit, on your invoice register, if you look at pending invoices, this is also where these will show up. So if we've got invoices pending either property or regional manager approval, they display here. as is a good other way to kind of reference all of them at once. Again, that was Invoice Register and the Pending tab. All right, well, as you guys have gathered by now, our check request, same thing. We download the check request form from Mission Control. This form is what's used for, let's say, pool parties. We're going to do a $500 pool party for a resident, and I don't have exactly $500 available at all times in my petty cash account because, you know, we use it. So I'm going to get a check request for $500 so that I can get things set up. We're going to fill out the form. We're going to send it to Nexus. Nexus will upload it. We do the same thing. We mark our pay by field as unsupported check request. We add our line items directly onto the invoice, submit it like normal, and it will go to our regional manager. What about capital expenditures? So real quick, what are they? CapEx items enhance the value of our property and provide future benefits. The classification of these is important because of our bank, our lenders. It's kind of why they're categorized as capital expenditures. They also require additional approval before payment, and what we're going to talk about is kind of the 3 different versions because each one of those requires different approvals. So the first one are all invoices that are coded to the general ledger accounts beginning with 150 and 920. All of those are processed without a pay-by field and without a purchase order. So when we get an invoice in, we've got line items that are coded to 150 and 920. Those line items are not linked to a purchase order, and we are not going to mark our pay-by field. Our RM will still get to see it and approve it before we move forward. What about our regional service managers? They come into play because they coordinate our CapEx projects totaling over $2,500. And because of that, Mission Rock collects a construction management fee on these. That's how our regional service managers kind of get their salary, right? So want to make sure that these are marked correctly because this construction management fee has to be created by that one role we talked about earlier, that RSM CapEx role, the admin within Mission Rock that will complete this. They see the invoice, they create the construction management fee invoice off of that, send that back to the property. It's coded to 1 GL only, 781390, in case you were wondering. Now you know. And that one is also processed without a pay-by field and without a purchase order. We add the line item straight onto it. So when do we actually use the pay-by field of CapEx? Only when the invoice is for a project where the project total is over $2,500 and it's overseen by the regional service manager, regardless of the GL. This trumps everything. So your regional service manager is in touch with you. They let you know which projects they're working on, right? Maybe it's expanding your pool or adding an outdoor fitness center or painting your whole property. Any invoices for those projects, we are going to mark with the pay-by field of CapEx, process it without a purchase order, and because of that, they get routed to 3 people for approval, your RM, your RSM, and your RSM CapEx before your accountant. Okay, that's a lot of information, a lot of types of CapEx. So let's throw it all together. We've got 3 things. We've got our 150 and 920 GLs. No purchase order, no pay-by field. Line item straight on it. We've got our CapEx management fees. It goes to one specific GL code only, but then there's no purchase order and no pay-by field. Then we have CapEx projects that our regional service managers are involved in. Still no PO, but these we do mark with the correct pay-by field. And again, the reason all of these are so specific is so that Nexus on the back end will route it to the correct people for approval. This is saving you from having to like export everything in the email and then send the email to 3 people and then get all their approval and then upload it back to Nexus, right? By slightly tailoring the way that we process these items, ultimately keeps it all in one system and keeps it a lot more streamlined for you in the long run. I want to check my question box here real fast. All right, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to keep going. Let's talk about emergencies. Here's the biggest thing to remember with emergency checks is that you got to talk to your accountant first. Because your accountant is the only person that can tell you the time frame in which an invoice can be processed on the same day as an emergency. Pick up the phone, call your accountant. They're your first line of defense on that. Also, contact your regional manager. All emergency checks require at least your regional manager's approval, and you can just get that through email and forward it on. If it's an emergency, right, we can do that. Some also need your EVP's approval. Your accountant is the one that will let you know which, or both, or who, or what, or where, or when. So what do you do in Nexus? After you've talked to your accountant and established, yes, this can be paid today as an emergency. After you've gotten your RM approval, yes, this can be paid today as an emergency. You do 2 things in Nexus. You mark the priority level field as urgent and the urgent request field as emergency check. Where are those bad boys? Here we go. Let me jump into an invoice real fast. Here we go. So on our invoice itself, we're going to mark the priority here as urgent on the right-hand side of our screen. This lets our accountant see it first. It's got the little flags by it. And then here in the middle section, this custom field, that's where we can say this is an urgent request. This is an emergency check. Based on the conversation with your accountant, you might even add a special handling note there. So do we need to overnight it? Do we need to pay it by phone, etc.? While we still push those invoices through Nexus, for emergencies, we got to have communication outside of Nexus with our accountant and our RM. What about HZ invoices, Hamilton's? Invoices received from the HZ owner group, they do need a purchase order. And just for reference, this is again all in the Nexus manual for Mission Rock policies. Just for reference, these are the common items you'll receive from HZ. Admin expenses, tax prep fees, third-party expense, property reimbursed expenses, and the GL codes and which descriptions you can use for them. Mention it because before we started Nexus, we didn't necessarily see these invoices. So now that HZ is sending them through our Nexus system to keep everything streamlined and all together, this is how we'll process it. There will be some outliers, right? There could be random legal fees that HZ does need to get reimbursement from the property for. That's unexpected, right? We may or may not even know that's coming. So if you don't always know it's coming, it's okay to make the purchase order right when you get the HZ invoice. But HZ is the only exception. Okay? Okay. Last but not least, let's chat about over budget authorization. All over budget requests must be authorized by an asset manager, but it's only when you're over budget for the whole category. That's the key here. This also needs to be done before the expense is incurred, but because we're following our workflow for Nexus, that means it's before the PO is approved, right? Meaning that anyone between the PO creation and the PO approval can submit this over budget authorization request. And this request is done strictly through Nexus now, again, to try and minimize how much you're jumping back and forth between systems. So it is done using the forward function, and we're going to go ahead and do that together. 2 seconds. Let me grab a purchase order. All right, I'm just going to pick a pending approval purchase order. But I want you to know that at any status, whether it's an open purchase order, an in progress purchase order, a pending approval purchase order, you always have this forward function available up at the top of your screen. To identify that an item is over budget, well, our line items fortunately tell us that. It shows our month-to-date budget, the remaining, and it gives us this awesome little triangle saying like, hey, warning, yo, stop, cool it, you're over budget. That triangle actually packs a punch because if you click it, you'll see a lot of information. You'll see your property and the code, right? This is the GL we're working in. Print, copy, fax. Print, copy, fax. It shows our month-to-date and year-to-date actual expenses, open purchase orders, open invoices, all the information it needs to get our total expenses so far and compare it to the budget. Now, I'm sorry, I'm in Magical Training Land. I don't have a budget in here because it's Magical Training Land, right? Therefore, everything's over budget, so it's kind of a good thing to show you. But the GL doesn't matter. Remember, I said that it's only when it's over budget by the category, right? Because if you look at repairs and maintenance, okay, we might be a little over on electrical, we might be a little over on HVAC, but we might be under on pool supplies and repair or under on golf cart expenses. What the owners want to see, again, this is generally, is the category. So they want to see the big picture. Let's zoom out to the general or admin. You switch that just by clicking the little magnifying glass up at the top. It's always going to show you the GL first. Click it once to view by category, and then we can see what we're looking at from a bigger picture. It does the same thing, though. It shows our month-to-date and our year-to-date, all of our actuals versus our budgeted expense. And the reason I'm showing you this, one, this is what we need to use to determine if an OBA is needed, over budget authorization. And then two, it's where we get the information to put in our forward PO function. Okay, so I've looked at this. I have viewed it by category. I see that I am over budget for the category. So before I approve this purchase order, I'm going to forward PO, which opens up a new window, allows me to create an email to my regional manager, who will then forward it to our asset manager. The message will be over budget authorization. You'll enter all that information, right? So 300 over budget for blah, blah, blah. We were budgeted XYZ. Our actuals are LMNOP. And here's year to date, here's month to date. All the information that little exclamation point showed us. That goes in our message. And on the right, we will select what information from the purchase order we want to be included in this. Once you do so, we can click Save. And here's what happens. The designated email recipient will get your PO information that's selected as an attachment, a PDF, and the message becomes the email body. They will, again, get it, forward it to your asset manager. Your asset manager sends it back. They're like, hunky-dory, peach keen, fine. You're okay to go ahead and order this. They send it back to you. You get the email, and you go in and approve it. I did see your question about our budget information. Remember, Nexus pulls budget information from Yardi every night overnight. That's what lets Nexus see our accruals in a timely fashion. And it sees our budget. If we have any changes to it, Nexus will know. Will it pull all day, every day? No, it's only once overnight. So keep that in mind. You guys, with that, we are done. I want to remind you where to go for help. You've got your accountant. You've got your manuals inside and outside of Nexus. Again, those are on Mission Control in Grace Hill. And you've also got the help desk. Your accountant is your first line of defense. I am your second. I will gladly help you guys out with anything you need in Nexus. Just let me know. If you have some feedback, I would love to hear it. You will be getting a survey, and it's anonymous, and I hope you fill it out because that's my performance review. That lets me know if I've accurately explained everything. And with that, you guys, we are done. If you have questions, please type them in the question box or just say, hey, Sarah, pick me and I will unmute you and we can talk about it.